Today, on our second special of 2019, I'm kicking off my trip to the White Mountains. And over the next 4 parts, I'll be heading to the easternmost part of Arizona to spend some time in the White Mountains. Known for its high elevation, cool rivers, and pristine meadows, this part of Arizona is truly one of the best and most unexpected parts of the state. Over this series, I'll be doing some 4-wheel drive exploring, taking scenic drives, and camping throughout the gorgeous Apache-Sitgreaves Forest in the area around Big Lake and west of the town of Alpine. Along the way, I'll be treated to scenic vistas, historic homesteads and old mines, and deal with some vehicle issues as I traverse over 600 miles in 6 days. This is the White Mountains Special. Hello everybody, and welcome to another AZ Off-Road special. I'm Scotty, and as you can see, Daniel is not here. He actually already flew out earlier this year to join us on our Arizona Peace Trail special. That was through western Arizona. Today, I am heading the opposite direction. I'm going to eastern Arizona on a solo trip into the White Mountains. Now, this is going to be a 4-part series, but I'm actually spending 6 days total, including a day to drive up and a day to drive back. Now, right now, I am almost halfway to the White Mountains, just a little before the Salt River Canyon, and I'm stopped here at Seneca Lake. There's some abandoned buildings here, and there's a nice little lake down there. I'm stopped here real quick before I continue on down the road to the end of an old forest road. There I hope to check out an old mine. I'm hoping to find a nice place to camp for the night, and then tomorrow morning we'll be right back out here on the highway and continue on up to the White Mountains, where we'll be spending the next 5 days. Should be a real nice time. Just gonna kind of take it a little bit easier, relax, cruise through the forest, find some great views, find some nice creeks to look at, and overall just enjoy the time up in this true gem of eastern Arizona. My journey begins here, just off Highway 60, about 30 miles north of Globe and just south of the Salt River Canyon. Right off the highway sits the abandoned buildings at Seneca Lake. This set of buildings are easily visible from the main thoroughfare that connects Show Low and Globe. However, not many people know much about it, and even fewer stop to check it out. These buildings were built in 1971 for around $525,000. The land is owned by the San Carlos Apache tribe. The idea was to create a resort, complete with a restaurant, trading post, gas station, and campground, all located just steps away from the small but scenic Seneca Lake. Not long after completion, however, the tribe defaulted on the loan that was used to build the resort, and almost as quickly as it sprung up, the buildings here were abandoned and left in a state of disrepair. It is unclear whether a lack of visitors caused the failure of what was surely a nice place at one point, and in fact the tribe was even considering expanding it at one point before it closed down. Today, the buildings remain heavily graffitied and trashed. They are certainly interesting to walk through, however, an eerie feeling remains on the property today. This quick stop, however, was only the start of my side trip here at Seneca Lake. I returned to the Jeep and continued down the paved road, which soon turned to dirt just past the lake. My plan for today was to continue about 8 miles down the trail to the end of an old forest road, and hopefully spend some time exploring a couple of old mines near Regal Canyon, before ultimately finding a place to camp near the rim of Salt River Canyon. This turnoff here at Seneca roughly marks the halfway point between Phoenix and the White Mountains. Since I would be doing less than 10 miles of trail and needed to be back to the highway early tomorrow, I decided not to air down for this stretch. Past the lake, the trail remained flat and smooth as I crossed into Tonto National Forest. The forest here was still pretty low elevation, around 4,500 feet, and smaller shrubs and trees lined the trail. Within just a couple of miles, though, the scenery changed. The view opened up as I approached the rim of the wide Salt River Canyon. Here, steep cliffs and hints of a few old tailings piles greeted me. It was clear I was approaching one of the two mining areas I wanted to check out today. The trail followed along the cliffs and got briefly narrow. Shortly after, the trail flattened back out and continued to the west. Just after the 3-mile mark, I approached a small, gated-off clearing. At this clearing used to sit the remains of the Phillips mine. Phillips mine was a small asbestos mine, and yes, you did hear that right. A little more on that later. Several buildings sat here at one point, but were apparently razed due to health and safety concerns, possibly having something to do with the asbestos material that it was built with. Since most of the mining took place further off the trail and it seemed like it was gated and fenced off pretty well, I had to continue on. Back on the trail, the road continued to the west and slowly climbed. Eventually, things topped out at around 5,000 feet. The scenery, however, remained pretty flat and densely covered with shrubs and trees. After a few more miles, the trail dropped down a fairly steep hill. The road was also moderately washed out in spots, which reduced my pace as I continued west towards the Regal Mine. This section was quite short and nothing crazy by any means, but it was a nice change of pace from the otherwise fast-moving miles thus far. Not long after the rougher section, the road turned back smooth. It continued to drop downhill as it made a long curve to the right. Within a quarter mile of the Regal Mine ruins, I came to what has to be one of the worst things you can find on a trail out in the backcountry: a locked and gated off-road. Apparently, in the few years since I had been to the property, ownership has changed and public access has been cut off. Unfortunately, and rather frustratingly, there had been no warning along the drive-in that the trail was closed so close to the mine ruins and buildings located at Regal Canyon. And with only one way in and out of the property, which is located in a fairly steep canyon, there was no easy way to get eyes on what is left today. There was, however, another way. Getting an aerial perspective of the property would allow me to at least get eyes on any ruins there might be and see what kind of condition they're left in today. And of course, this is perfectly legal. From the air, it didn't take long to see just how much of the Regal Mine has been relatively untouched in the years since it closed down. The Regal was first operated by the Arizona Asbestos Company in the late 1930s up until around 1945. The mine was most profitable in 1941 and 42, producing over $50,000 in ore. Around 15 people worked at the mine at that time, using diesel generators and compressors. A reliable water source had been secured, although the rugged terrain made mining efforts rather difficult. The mine shut down for a brief time before being reopened under new ownership in the mid-1950s. Up to 50 people at a time worked the mine throughout the 1960s. Ore was hauled 30 miles from the mine site back to the paved road and down to a mill in Globe, where the ore was further refined and sent off to market. The mine closed down sometime around 1970 due to the lack of high-grade ore. So yes, this mine produced asbestos. Unlike other major mines throughout the state that produce gold and silver or even copper, this one is certainly unique. Now, the asbestos that was mined here was found in naturally occurring serpentine and chrysolite, which is actually really abundant in this area. The longer fibers that were found in these kind of rocks, while still dangerous, were used in the construction industry for things like insulation, plaster, and even gas mask filters. As part of the mining process, these rocks and fibers were inevitably broken down into smaller, more dangerous pieces that required special considerations for those working in the mine at the time. It wouldn't be until much later that asbestos was even recognized and considered dangerous, and to this day, the United States does still allow it to be used in certain industries. Numerous structures remain on the property at the Regal today. On the south end, several different sized buildings remain in the creek bottom. Some have collapsed over the last few years. About 5 years ago, before the property was gated, I did manage to take a quick walk around this area, and the pictures you are seeing now are some of those buildings from a few years back. They appear to be some kind of house or living space of some kind. From the aerial view, it appears that this building has actually since collapsed. Perhaps much more impressive are the tailing piles and haulage tracks that remain near the mine adits. Located further north along the steeper walls of the canyon, these are precariously balanced with waste rock dumped down into the ravine. They appear to be in surprisingly good condition today, although actually getting to them would prove to be very difficult due to their location on the canyon walls. Unfortunately, this was pretty much all there is to see from this vantage point. It turns out the mine is actually for sale and you can buy it for a cool $230,000, which if you do, let me know because I'd love to come out and get a better look. I turned around on the trail and continued back up the way I came. Roughly a mile from the Regal Mine gate, I turned off the main road and headed west. The trail quickly passed through an old corral as it swung to the north. The plan now was to head to my planned camping area just ahead on the edge of the Salt River Canyon. The trail quickly got narrow and much rougher. Past the corral, it is clear that not many people have been on this trail. After crawling along in some fresh Arizona pinstriping, I made it to a clearing roughly a mile later. I parked the Jeep and hopped out on foot to check out the view. Looking down into the Salt River Canyon was nothing short of breathtaking. The river, now almost 1,500 feet below my elevation, silently flowed off in the distance. The towering canyon walls were also quite impressive. Just to the east of me were some more remnants from the Regal Mine that I hadn't been able to see earlier from the main road. With a nice cleared area and a more than okay view, I figured this was too good of a camp spot to pass up. While it was still a bit early due to the unplanned gate closure, I had already covered all of my planned miles for the day. I popped open the tent and quickly got my cooking gear set up. The weather was a little warm, but remained mostly mild as I sat down to enjoy the view for a while. It was at this point I couldn't help but notice a large plume to my west. This was the smoke plume from the Woodbury fire burning in the Superstition Wilderness. While I was over 50 air miles away from the actual fire, the plume was easily visible, and with the prevailing winds shifting, much of it was actually drifting this way. I fired up the stove and got started on an early dinner. Tonight was going to be some barbecued chicken and rice. It cooked up nice and quick, and I sat down to eat with an epic view. As the evening wore on, the smoke was getting much thicker. The sun was now an eerie blood red color, and a little bit of ash was even falling from the sky. While I knew I was more than a safe distance away, it was still a pretty weird experience. Naturally, the sunset put on quite a show, and the smoke-filled canyon made for some really unique visuals. Not long after 8 p.m., the sun was finally down, and I crawled up into the tent. Today had been a fairly long day, and I wanted to be up nice and early tomorrow morning to get a good jump on the rest of the drive up into the White Mountains. It was around 5:30 the next morning when I was up and around. I had slept great. The night was quiet and perfectly still, and leaving all of the window screens open in the tent had been a good call. It was actually so quiet that when I woke up this morning, I could actually hear the Salt River thundering below. After getting dressed, I got my gear out of the tent and quickly packed it up. I wanted to get out of here quick this morning. Next up was breakfast. I'd be keeping it simple this morning in order to save time. I got some water boiling for oatmeal and coffee. I'd be trying my new French press on this trip, which seemed like it would be a great addition for some quick and easy caffeination. Within minutes, breakfast was ready to go, and I had a nice hot cup of coffee to enjoy. I quickly packed up the remaining gear into the Jeep and made sure camp was all cleaned up. By 6:45, I was completely packed up and ready to hit the trail, which I think may be a new AZ Off-Road record. Okay, we are leaving our first night's camp, going to head back to Highway 60 now, but I am really glad that I ended up staying the night here. Last night it was a little weird with the haze and all the smoke from the wildfire pretty far down the way there. But throughout the night, it was super still, just calm, very mild temperatures, stayed plenty warm. And then waking up this morning to that incredible view was pretty awesome. So glad I picked here. We do have about 8 miles to go of trail to get back to the highway, but we're gonna do that now. And then we'll be actually descending into Salt River Canyon and heading up through Show Low, and then finally into the White Mountains. I retraced my route from yesterday as I continued south on the faint and narrow tracks. I passed through the dilapidated corral, and to my surprise, a cattle trailer had just been parked there this morning. I continued back up the washed out hill and was quickly back on smooth and fast-moving forest roads. The views were once again impressive along the cliffs, and before I knew it, I was back at the still waters of Seneca Lake. The lake has camping and fishing opportunities available, but if you do plan on that, you will need a permit to recreate on the reservation. Past the abandoned buildings at Seneca, I was back on Highway 60 and northbound. The road quickly drops into the scenic Salt River Canyon, and the drive is stunning. On the other side of the river, the road climbs towards Show Low. Within a couple of hours, I was outside of Pine Top, and I topped off the tank and ice chest. I continued along 260, and at last, I turned south towards Big Lake and into the heart of the White Mountains. The highway here was over 8,000 feet, and wide open meadows and thick forests greeted me around every bend. Next time, I continue into the White Mountains as I get back to dirt roads. The scenic views continue in the area surrounding Big Lake as I make my way through the highest elevations of the forest around 9,500 feet. Expansive meadows and lush streams await as I work my way to my next campsite on the banks of the West Fork of the Black River.